Greetings to one and all. Welcome to the Digi Stage of Learnings at the 18th edition of Mahindra Excellence in Theatre Awards. Today, we're discussing a very important and interesting topic: the politics of theatre. Is it just Nautanki? What we seek to understand through this discussion is how far beyond the stage do theatrical acts go? Are plays that speak of and dramatize social issues just performative? This conversation is going to shed light on whether theatre is seen as pure entertainment or does it have the responsibility of reflecting society and its many issues. I'm absolutely delighted and honored to be joined today by two towering voices in the universe of theatre, Quasar Thakore-Padamsee and Anjum Katyal. So let's set the tone of this conversation by first just trying to understand, if there is one, then what is the social responsibility of theatre? Starting with Anju.
I think the key word there becomes the word responsibility. Are we seeing it as a duty, or are we seeing it as a kind of inbuilt commitment, which is not enforced from anybody on the outside, but is part of the makeup of the artist who is taking part in that particular work of art? And theater, because it's a group activity, because it pulls together so many people, and because it focuses on the collective, even when you have a solo performance, it's still somewhere a collective. There's somebody who's written it, somebody who's conceived it, maybe even directed it, lit it, done the sound, helped get the audience into the hall, etc. So theater remains a kind of a group commitment. So here, when you look at the word responsibility again, if one sort of, sort of imposes the idea that that theater has a responsibility, and therefore all theater must, fulfill this responsibility of social commitment, I feel that it can be quite stifling to the artist, because it feels that almost everything that they do, or how they think, or how they has to be linked somewhere to social responsibility. But and we've seen this as an experiment that was tried with the Soviet Union, with social realism coming in, and what it did to the arts, and how eventually a lot of the artists rebelled. Why? Not because they were not conscientious human beings and good citizens who wanted to do their part for society, but because the rules and regulations governing what they could do and what they couldn't do had become so stifling. So I feel that yes, to me, the answer is yes, there is a huge responsibility, but it's the responsibility a concerned, aware, sort of concerned citizen, somebody who wants a just and equitable society, wants to see an end to discrimination and biases on unfair grounds. A person like that, who is also a creative person and does theater, would probably bring that aspect of his and her thinking and value system into the work they create. I don't know if I've been able to make myself clear, but that's kind of the way I see it.
Yes.
Prasad?
Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think you said that quite well, and I think what you touched upon is exactly this. The moment there is some kind of an agenda for why a piece of art is being created, you'll find artists rebelling against it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
if you put a gun to someone's head and saying make art that is socially responsible, most likely they're going to make a fluff piece that is in counter to all of that, because that's how artists are. We are by nature rebellious, by nature anarchists in a strange way. I think the theater is a very interesting place to actually have this conversation, because for a long time, particularly in India, thanks to IPTA and all of that, we all grew up with this idea that theater has a larger role and it is more nobler and all of that. And theater is a slightly strange place because we are dependent on bums on seats in order to survive. Like, we need people to come in and watch it and pay tickets to come in. But at the same time, we also are an art form where we're expressing what we feel. It comes from us. I mean, as an artist, if you make a sculpture and you sculpture and you leave it there, or you make a painting and you leave it there, the art still exists. Within the theater, we need that second layer of audience. So we are strangely between two stools. And that's the interesting thing, because commercial art, for example, so within the theater fraternity, we do have commercial theater, and that's absolutely valid, and people do that. But I think what is far more interesting and what happens is that a lot of theater people are committed humanists. And the theater as an art form places the human being at the center. There is technology and everything else is secondary. Even the space is secondary. Without an actor on stage or in any space, you have no performance, you have no theater. And I think that's philosophically how we are. So the moment when we're creating work, anyone, if you're true to being human and the human experience, automatically it will have a social responsibility, because your aim is to try and tell that story versus, hey, let's put an item number here, people will come see it, which is more a commercial kind of act. Nothing wrong with it, but I think that there are different kinds of theater that get created. And I think the theater lends itself much better to tell human stories from someone present physically with you. And it's almost like, because the commercials are much more manageable than when you think of a film or whatever, a film is spending 20, 30, 40 crores to make it. The need for an audience to see is much, much greater. you know um, the theater has a much lesser kind of baggage with financial baggage, and therefore there is an opportunity there to tell something that's really meaningful and powerful, and that connects with those 100, 200,000 people in that room on that particular night. So yeah, it is fantastic what the kind of writing that has happened. I don't think writers set out to say, okay, I'm going to write a very rarely do they set out to say, I'm going to write a play that is about society. They start writing a human story and it ends up being about society, because if you write it
Yeah.
honestly, it will be about society. It'll pass comment, it'll pass judgment, it'll be an analytical thing.
Quasar, if I can just pick up on a point you were making, where you were differentiating us between the commercial theater, which may think like, okay, let's put in an item number here and audience will come, and the more sort of artistically driven theater, which is trying to express something very genuine and human. I was just thinking of societies where just the act of getting up on stage and dancing or singing or performing in public, the body of the woman performing in public, that is a taboo. And just by
Yeah,
virtue of even opening that little space, and even if it's commercial, even if it's done to earn money purely, or it's done to sort of just put in an item number or whatever, just the fact that it exists and has the courage to be there and announce its presence is performing a certain kind of social sort of service, in a way, in
absolutely.
societies where, yeah,
So I think we're just differentiating between what is the aim to put something up and what is the you're absolutely right. The fact, you cannot, just to use a more or widespread reference, you cannot not call Helen a social icon,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
For all her item numbers and all of that. And at the time that she did that and whatever, and you have to pay respect to that. She
yeah,
created a revolution
right,
in through a commercial experience. But I think
yeah,
the aim of why that item number was there from the artistic point of view was
yeah,
to attract eyeballs,
yeah,
versus from an artistic point of view, when you set up something,
yeah,
like for example, Sunil's cotton 56 polyester
right,
72 whatever, or something like that, where the aim of the thing is to shine a light on a particular social issue, or
right,
to try and say something, even your Taj Mahal ka tender, or whatever it is.
yeah, yeah,
I think there's a mix.
yeah,
There's that the lovely allegory that even Tughlaq, for example, is a play that actually had social, was very much written as a product of its time, as a reaction to the dictatorial regimes that were happening at its time. And that's the beautiful thing about the theaters. They all exist within a specific time and place,
right,
and that's when they are created.
yeah,
A Sakaram
yeah,
binder, we now call it, a social revolution and what he wrote. But at the time, he was writing a story of what he saw, and he put that out there. And then it takes a little bit of time for everyone to look back at it and go,
yeah,
oh, actually that influenced, that pushed, that
yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. No,
uh
absolutely, I get it. But that's what I was it was more like finding it fascinating that even when we're talking about the aim being slightly different, maybe the aim is not social responsibility but it's commerce, but somehow it can function in a subversive way and become a socially important performance, but just by virtue of being there. So it's just interesting that there are all these layers at which theater in a society can function.
Absolutely. So I think to like summarize, it is that when you have the courage to put out a work of art in public, it in itself carries the capacity to spark social change. Intent or not, it is a work of art which is made of its circumstances. And there were some very important things that both of you shed light on it. But there's one thing that also you talked about how, of course, you need bum on seats, you need people to watch. And I would like to sort of steer this discussion also towards accessibility, who gets to view and react to theater. And I would first like to hear from Anjum, because you consider Badal Sarkar to be the single most influential figure in contemporary Indian theater. And you've written about his theater challenging normative mores and his philosophy of free theater. So please shed some light on what this says about the importance of making that space accessible, because to spark that social change, you need the society to be there, viewing, watching, reacting.
Right. Okay. Thank you for bringing up Badal Sarkar. Badal Da, as many of us call him. Somebody who thought about what was happening in terms of accessibility. For him, it was very, very important that the theatre should be absolutely seen by people without it being dependent on them having to afford a ticket all the time to come to an auditorium and sit there and watch a play. So he understood the politics of space. He understood that very often performative spaces can be exclusive. They can just, even without putting up a specific notice saying so and so not allowed, it can make certain kinds of people, certain classes of society feel unwelcome and not included. And so his idea was, he came up with this concept of the third theater. And why he called it the third theater was because he says the first theater in India is the traditional theater, which has lived in our villages and on our streets for centuries, and which is largely till date been historical, mythological, but also included a fair amount of social criticism in its own kind of way, especially in the humor. But that's India's first theater. Then you have the second theater, which came in with colonialism, which is your proscenium theater, the urban middle class, upper middle class theater that most people had begun to see as mainstream theater. And that deals with social issues, that's political. Very often, he was working at a time when Utpal Dutt was doing a very, very mainstream but very political theater on the proscenium stage. But Badulda's idea was that, right, that theater exists, that's your second theater. What is my third theater? Third theater is a theater that moves away from these two models, uses aspects of them, but goes out into the open spaces, out into the streets, and is just present in that space for people to come and see. So he moved away from the idea of the proscenium for two reasons. One is, of course, accessibility. The other, which was kind of linked, was also the freedom to do theater with nothing but the actor's body. So his idea was that let's move away from the economy of sets and lights and props and having to book a stage and book rehearsal time. Let's move away from that, because very often that is what kind of stifles the work that groups are trying to do, especially when they're young and they don't have the the backing or the finance to go in for all this. So let's move into a space where it is the actor who carries the theater in his or her body. And that makes us free to perform anywhere. It can be a street corner, it can be a maidan, it can be a hall, a community hall, it can be a school classroom, it can be a courtyard, anywhere. And we can just take the theater to the people. So that's a different a kind of a model also. And the third theater is very useful, I feel, in a place like India, where the reality is that a lot of creativity is generated amongst classes which cannot afford even to get together in one set place for rehearsal very often because of transport issues, coming from far, working all kinds of hours, etc. So for them, this freedom that we can perform anywhere, we just take our work to a space and perform there, was very liberating. And a lot of the people I spoke to in the course of even researching the book spoke about that liberatory factor as young theater people trying to do something. Suddenly they found, wow, this that we can do theater. We don't have to wait around and be picked up and be, sort of selected and find our money. We can start somewhere. So I guess that those were the kind of major ways in which Badulda contributed. I mean, many, many more. His training and his pedagogy was also very important. But in terms of access, I guess this would be it.
Kasa?
Yeah, I mean, I think Badalda's contribution on the landscape and what he was able to do. And interestingly, he went through his own journey, right? He did do things like Evam
Yes,
Indrajit and stuff that were more, proscenium based, and then he discovered that,
absolutely.
hey, this doesn't fit, or there needs to be a thing. And like I said, at the end of the day, artists are anarchists, so he's taken something that he's thrived in and then blown it up and gone off, and said, let's open it out. Because I think what he was very interested in, I think, and what Anjum touched upon, is the artistic impulse, the impulse to create, and the moment you start creating and you're starting to tell human stories. And obviously every, like they say, right, all art is political and all art is social. So it's the same thing, right? Like if you're performing in a proscenium theater, there is a problem. I mean, and we have this even till today. I mean, the other day I was working with a gentleman called Divya Bhatia, who actually works with a group of people from a low income group, and they were all coming to watch Adi Shakti's Bali at Prithvi Theatre. And one of the questions that they asked is, "Are we allowed in there?" And uh, Divya said, "Yes, we have tickets." They said, "Yes, sir, but are we allowed in there?" And that is, now you're talking about Prithvi, that we all talk about as the open space, and it's the theater for theater people. It's like, and like it really shocked us a little bit, like this the fact that there are these invisible barriers, that are just about the way something is laid out,
Yes.
makes it forbidden, makes it
Yeah.
problematic.
In fact,
um
Quasar, I'm sorry, I'm just
yeah,
this is just picking up on what you were saying. I remember Habib Tanvir, used to work with Chhattisgarhi actors, and they would be booked into the biggest halls in the city, considered the most prestigious. And there was always this issue when they were showing up.
yeah,
I mean, they would come in twos and threes and fours, and very often there would be this question of where are you going? Why are you, trying to enter? But because they didn't look like they were the class of people who should be entering the green room.
yeah.
So, these kinds of things are absolutely, inbuilt into our very hierarchical society.
Yeah, and Eric, I think something also boils down to how we have viewed our, or how we view space as a people, and how we view particularly our performance spaces. So because our performance spaces have all come out of the temple culture, right? They are all prohibitive spaces,
Mm.
right? Even when we build a theater, we're always designing it about who you keeping out. Whether you're talking about, all the stuff at Mandi House, or all the stuff at the NCPA, or any venue, there seems to be this kind of demarcation. And this, I don't just mean this for theaters, I mean this for everything, even public access parks or whatever, where there's always this thing of you're allowed, not allowed. There's
Yeah.
one guard with a lathi ready to chase you out. There's always that attitude, and it almost works counterintuitive to the arts. And I think Badalda tapped into that and was able to break that a little bit. And there've been some fantastic movements across the country like that. I think, even what Prabir Goa did in
Absolutely.
Bengal has been fantastic for that. What Devi and all did in Andhra Pradesh has been fantastic, about taking theater to villages and performing. Um,
Or
and
Janam
it
in
really
Delhi,
does.
street
Oh,
theater in
Janam, yeah,
Delhi.
and you just completely break this mold of this sit and receive kind of thing. And in that there is social change. In that there is access
Absolutely.
to make an impact.
Yeah.
And then whether you take it the further political you take it now, everyone goes, oh, but it's one form of propaganda. Now propaganda is only when you're, for me, propaganda is commercial, right? Like if you're doing it for a reason that is not actually true to why you're creating that piece of work, it's advertising.
Yeah.
So for example, yes, I make a living doing corporate events. I do car launches and all, and yes, I write a little bit of a piece and I do that, but that's advertising. That's not theater in the same way. It's very commercial. But when you're creating something, for a piece of theater, and you're creating it as an artist, right? You want it to be as human as possible.
Yeah.
How resonant it is with people. What is the insight? Where does it go? And as long as the intent is there, then whether four people see it or 50,000 people see it, it doesn't matter. Because the intent is what is pure. And whether it impacts social change or not immediately is not the answer. It is something that takes time, to build off on this. I mean, from in the Maharashtra perspective, it took Vijay Tendulkar many years before suddenly everyone realized, oh my God, he's holding up a mirror to middle class Maharashtra.
That's morality. Yeah.
which was the theater going audience, and they're all looking at
Yeah.
it as some exotic kind of thing far away. And then suddenly it took a series of plays where they suddenly went, oh, wait a minute, he's talking about us. Okay, we don't like this anymore, let's ban it. And then stuff started rolling. And that's the amazing thing. Karna did it in a different way. He decided to set stuff in the past, and all sorts of things in folk tales, but was still passing comment
Yeah.
on the
Absolutely.
on the time that
Yeah.
he was writing. Um, and playwrights find different ways to kind of maneuver that, in order to make a proper impact. But maybe they weren't setting out to make an impact. They're setting out to tell a story of something they've seen. It's all of us who now sit back and say, yes, Badaldar did this, and yes, Tendulkar Saab did that. We're looking at it now as bodies of work. But at the time, they were
Or
just
you
writing.
take a play which is a classic, like say a Hayavadana, and over time it keeps getting interpreted and read and read and read, through feminist lenses, through class lenses,
Yeah.
through all sorts of different ways of looking at it. So that also happens with a really good works of art,
So
theater.
it's once you put your art in the public, how the public receives it is beyond the control of both the artist and what is happening to the entity as it exists. And I think both of you shed light on, and Kausar, you especially, you talked about the idea of the space being prohibitive. So you're thinking about how there is inaccessibility. Now that's on the stage. So you're thinking about a performance and it being viewed. There needs to also be a discussion on what's going on behind the scenes and how do we ensure accessibility there. Because recently, and rightfully so, we've been talking about staging stories wherein representation does matter. So if you are telling a story on supposedly queer struggles, the people who are working behind the scenes need to be queer. At least they need to form a part of, be it the playwrights, or be it as playwrights, or be it as costume designers. So where are
Yeah.
we in terms of representation behind the scenes?
Kosa, why don't you
Like,
take this first, because you're actually an active
So
theater person.
it's a strange thing, right? Like, um, much as we like to say, particularly within the urban theater, because that's the theater that I work in, and that's the theater that I see, and I would call it my contemporary world. Um, you know, we we are all, for want of a better phrase, very, very liberal and open, and we want stuff to happen. We haven't put the systems in place, right? We don't have the machinations for that. Someone told me something very interesting, and I'll share this as an aside, almost as a counterpoint to what I've just said. But someone said, uh, theater is a bunch of misfits coming together to do something marvelous. When we don't fit in anywhere else in the world, we come to the theater and we find our tribes, because we are all working towards something. And on the one hand, that's absolutely true. It doesn't matter linguistically, it doesn't matter class wise, it doesn't matter caste wise, it doesn't matter religious wise, it doesn't matter sexual orientation or gender or anything, in this is in principle. And a lot of people do work like that, and a lot of do that. I think the larger problem is the invisible barriers, right? We haven't set up systems where that is possible or plausible. Now, I work with one of the projects we run is something called THESPO, which is for people under the age of 25, right? And it is remarkable over the last over the last 10 or 15 years, how many people uh, are across the LGBTQI spectrum who are now slowly coming into the theater. But I don't know if there are that many, or I don't know if there are enough transgender people that have made it into the theater, because I think there's still a feeling of being judged. But having said that, if you look at what Sharanya's play Nava that happened out of Bangalore, where she worked with 9 transgenders to tell their stories, and it's a fantastic piece, right? It's a really powerful piece of theater. But they were like, yeah, we're getting respectability, but we still have to go and walk the streets at night, because that's where we have to still earn a living. There is that clash, and I don't think society, and I don't think that the theater fraternity we don't have a feed mechanism to be that open at a much earlier level. Having said that, there are other sides of accessibility. For example, I mean, it's been quite wonderful, but like, people are so much more open about their mental health struggles, right? So we're having people across the spectrum who are wanting to come and work in the theater, and they're flagging up that these are my problems, right? And the theater is quite an accepting space for that, because we have time. We don't have the pressures of the same commercial, kind of, it has, thing that oh my God, if something goes wrong, 20 crores gets blown up. No, we don't have that problem. We are a much more fluid, and we're a people medium. The people are the key, right? I mean, if there's anything I missed during lockdown, it was rehearsal. Wasn't the shows. It was just being in a room with other people, and we're all working together on something. So I think that the accessibility question is big, particularly within the workforce of the theater. And some of it is like, I mean, I know where it's so wide, right? I don't think we have enough representation of visually impaired people in the theater. There are hardly any who actually, can. And you ask me, backstage is the best place. It's where they will thrive, because it's all done. It's there, it's amazing what is possible and plausible. And we've tried that with some people. But so there are untapped kind of areas that we just haven't done. But I will also say this, that the backstage world is still a nascent world. It's only now in the last 5, 7, 8 years that we now have regular stage managers, regular production managers. Otherwise it was always an actor who wasn't getting a part, who was doing the back. Now these are specialized positions, lighting designers, lighting operators. These are now specialized positions. So I think that we are still quite nascent. We need to catch up very, very fast, because we can't always be behind the curve. That's not acceptable. And I do think that these are some of the areas that we do need to look at as a fraternity. And when I say as a fraternity, I don't mean that there's this big meeting where we all sit and talk about it. It just means that each of us in our own groups starts opening up this little thing and trying to provide accessibility for that.
So
I mean, ramps, like, we still don't have ramps in our theaters. It's a problem.
Yeah, talking about ramps, how about decent toilets for women?
Yeah.
Especially if you have long hours of rehearsal. Yeah, so just going back to your question, Mehek, about this business of, representing, that also was a little bit part of the question, that a lot of theatre may be dealing with social issues, but are we also including the people we're talking about? Or does it remain at the level of talking about? And of course, this is something that has plagued theatre for a very, very long time. We've talked about women's issues. Playwrights have written about them. Playwrights have written about caste. We've had famous Bengali plays like Nabanna talking about the plight of the workers. But who plays all that on stage? is the middle class body usually, and not necessarily the people who are being spoken about. So this I feel is a double-edged sword, because again, then you kind of wander into that forbidden area of saying that just because you are not authentically from that background, cannot speak or do justice to it. So it's a very nuanced field, because there has to be sensitivity to the fact that you are speaking about an experience, and there are people around who you could possibly tap into who actually have that experience, right? Just as when you read books by writers who have done years of research, and they've actually gone and spoken to the kind of people they want to write about, etc., etc., they've built up. Or you have your method acting actors who've researched the people. So there is a space where that authenticity can be valued, can be included, can be given its due recognition, right? Without also then saying that nobody who is not, for example, black, should play a black person, or nobody who is not a abused woman should play an abused woman. I mean, this whole inclusion exclusion thing has to, I think, remain sensitive to this. That we have to figure out ways of not doing the sort of tone deaf act of not at all including them, but also not letting it come to a stage where everybody else is beginning to feel inauthentic or not enabled or disabled from speaking about or representing that. I don't know, what do you feel? I don't know if any of this makes
No,
sense.
I think you're right. I think we are being more aware of these things, and we're still straddling and coming to terms with it as we should. I mean, a few years ago, I was working on a lovely play called Parvati's Dark Children, written by Ramneek from Bangalore. And when we were having a conversation, one of the things that the play never made it, but this is just a story about how when we were trying to build it. And one of the stipulations, and it's set in the Gondi tribal district and all of that. And one of the things that he said to me, he says, whatever you do, you must cast as Gondis have to be dark people, dark skinned people. And I was like, yeah, but suspension of disbelief, theater, also I'm also thinking like a director in Bombay, what will I have access to? But I said, okay, fair enough, we'll go with that. And then we started auditioning actors. And it is remarkable what our commercial industries have done, because there are very few dark actors,
Yeah.
And we auditioned maybe 200 people, and at the end of it, I was despondent, because I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize that our entire industry has suppressed these people, that after the age of, maybe when they were 14, 15 or 16, they realized that their life is not in front of on stage or not this thing, because there are no opportunities. They're not being cast. They're not giving this things. And we literally, we were scraping everyone, that we could find. And it was such a problem.
Yeah.
Now that is a huge oversight, right? And also the theater exists in a larger ecosystem, right? We in a larger ecosystem of other arts and other forms of entertainment and stuff like that. And it was like in Bombay particularly, where we think we have, throw a rock, you hit an actor that you want, kind of thing. Like it was a real problem. Now that is a area. It's an invisible barrier that has been created.
Right.
And these are things that we all have to be much more aware of, and we
Yeah.
have to break that, and we have to get this. And this is one example. I think there are many examples.
Yeah. Like, for
And I
example,
think inclusivity.
yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry,
sorry,
no, I
Anjum.
was just going to add to that by saying another area is body shaming for women. If you're not considered to be svelte and slim, of course, fairness, which you already talked about, is a major, uh, sort of dividing line between those who are considered fair, those who are considered darker skin. But yeah, the body shape. So you're right, Kwasar, that these are areas one doesn't even consciously realize can create situations where when you're looking for somebody who is not of a typical kind of within a typical range of acceptable appearance, it becomes difficult. Thanks for that.
Thank you to both of you. I mean, I think we tapped into very important areas in terms of the loopholes and these invisible barriers, from representation of LGBTQI on stage to, of course, bathrooms that exist in the theater space, which are very important spaces that we need to think about, and barriers and loopholes. And just so to link that with awareness, and as my last question, I mean, this does come with theater education. And that is what I want to ask both of you, because Kaustubh, you've talked about the healing power of theater. Both of you believe theater to be this immersive experience that can be transformative, that can spark social change. But where are we in terms of course, there is, you mentioned TESPO for children who are, for, people who are below the age of 25. But what about, just schools? And I know as people in theater, like in any other field, every person from every field would believe that their field needs to be talked about in schools. But let's stick to theater in this instance. Where are we in terms of bringing about awareness of theater as not only something that exists on the stage, but as something that a lot of people can take up, and what it can teach you about being human and having a human experience, being more personal on stage, and so on and so forth. So, Kausar, starting with you.
So it's kind of interesting, a lot of the times we look for the justification of theater in other things, right? Like, oh, if you do theater, you become a better public speaker, or you gain confidence, or you gain organization, or you gain teamwork, all this kind of stuff. And yes, all of that is valid. They're all byproducts. A few of those people will then go on to have careers in the arts and in the performing or backstage or whatever. That's great. But something that I think that the theater teaches you, and it does this because you're in depth going into a human analysis, right? When as a child, if I'm playing a fox, I'm also trying to think the motivation of a fox, and I'm trying to figure out what and why am I going there and what am I doing, and you start understanding more about people and motivations and humans. And I genuinely do believe this. I believe that every child should be exposed to theater, both to watch so that they can actually start imagining a world, because the cinema world doesn't allow you to imagine, right? In the theater, you can stand on a bed sheet and say I'm at Antarctica, and an audience will believe you, and even the child's imagination goes to Antarctica, right? So one is that, and two is, and I genuinely believe this, by working in the theater, all right, by working in the theater, even as a kid, even as uh, a child in 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old, I do believe that the theater makes you a better human being. And unfortunately, we don't have that as a value in the rest of our education system. It doesn't exist. We get very siloed in science. Commerce is about doing well, getting this thing. We get into I mean, there's a lovely example of MIT, which is so MIT basically, when the atom bomb was finally dropped, when in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, MIT were a bit shocked that 8 of the 12 scientists were from MIT, right? And they were like, how did our people, our geniuses, create something so destructive? And then they went back and they realized that they were scientists, so they were only working with reactions. There was no human impact on those reactions and calculations. So then MIT made it a rule, which is that if you are coming to MIT, you must minor in a humanity, whether it's art, painting, music, theater, and they have an incredible theater program, one of the best theater programs in all of America. But you can't major in the theater; you can only minor in the theater. And that was an incredible flip for them, because then they wanted their scientists who otherwise would just be lab, and we are completely like that, right? Like, you can drop math from the you choose science, science, commerce, or arts from the 8th standard onwards, and you can spend your entire life not having interaction with any of the other sides. But this thing that they did at MIT suddenly made people aware of the human interaction. It made aware of the other side of beauty. It made the other side of what is value. And I think the theater does that very, very much so. And therefore, I actually feel it should be prescriptive for every child.
Yeah.
And I don't mean this only for public speaking and confidence and, all. Yes, all of those are byproducts to the actual thing that theater achieves, which is it just makes you a better human being. It makes you more functional to work with people, to understand each other, understand different characters. And about maybe 10 years ago, someone asked me, why are you in the theater? And I was like, oh, some cool glib answer, like, because there's nothing else I would rather do, or some rubbish like that. And I, I've looked at all the plays I've worked on and all the people I've worked with, and I realized that with every play, I become a better human being in a little way, whether it's working on something to understand a little bit about Tibetan refugees or about mental health or about whatever. It keeps opening up my life. And I think that's why I'm in the theater. And I think that's why everyone should be in the theater, because it does push you in a direction where, as we started this whole thing, where there is a social responsibility. You understand that I am one part of a much larger network. Um, and it may reflect in your work, it may not, but just by being exposed to it, it automatically will make a difference.
Right. In fact, to pick up on what Quasar has been saying, one of the hats I wear is also an education hat. I started my life as a teacher and a teacher trainer. And uh, any form of getting from a very young age, young kids to work together to create something performative, right? Writing the script themselves, forming teams, working with each other, interacting and learning how to listen to each other, learning how to absorb ideas from each other, learning how to divide work. So it's not all about me, and I did this and I did that, but realizing that what you have made could only have been made because all of you put in effort. These kinds of value systems, which are essential to a functioning democracy, which are essential to just being a good human being, learning to respect the space that every human being has and what they bring and what they contribute. These kinds of values do come out of something, out of theater, precisely because of the collective nature of theater. And I think Prasad pointed that out very well. And therefore, the second part of your question is that where do we stand? And I think he said that, what he was saying about it should become prescriptive, may not be the favorite best way to put it, but certainly if schools and people in charge of youngsters start bringing this kind of activity into schools, as he said, not only for a utilitarian purpose. Oh, you learn to speak better, you learn to communicate better. Yes, all that will happen. But also from the point of view of growing you as a person, just the experience of having been part of a work of theater and a collectivity, you see the kind of emotional bonding that happens. And when the play is over, how there's such a sense of have created something really important together. Even if it's a small, you know, children's play in a school, that bond is an invaluable human bond, which I think, is, yeah. Pasar, you want to say something?
Sorry. The one thing actually you touched upon it, but I just want to highlight is the theater teaches you empathy.
Yeah.
And for us to be a functional democracy, that element is very, very important, because otherwise it just becomes majoritarian, and it becomes insular. And I think, so I genuinely believe that the theater has a role to play in the way societies evolve. The Greeks did it best. So in ancient Greece, it was compulsory to go and watch the play in Athens, and you actually had to pay for it. But if you didn't have money, you could go to a government-sponsored window and get the one, whatever the currency was at the time, and then pay it and go and watch. And it was compulsory. It was compulsory because it taught you empathy. It also, what they called catharsis, which is pity and fear, would then get washed over you, which meant that it was it was almost like a counseling session. You let all your emotions out, you cleanse your emotions, and then you're more functional for the rest of it. So the theater, I mean, I think has huge value within a society, and I don't mean this at a professional level. I just mean it as a activity level. Just doing it, makes it something. And especially now, where so much of our information is off a screen, like we are right now, but so
Yeah.
much of it is off a screen and not in 3 dimensions. I think, when you talk about the Holocaust, and we talk about it, and it's terrible thing, and you read about it and it's horrible and all, but when you hear someone in front of you talk
Very
about it,
sorry.
and they wince, and their mouth dries up, and they gulp, there is a different, softer learning that happens. It goes past. Um, so my father had a concept called the emotional retina. So it goes past your main seeing eye and hits your emotional retina. It hits
Yeah.
your emotions, and it moves you in that way, and therefore you become a much more empathetic human being, in a way.
Right. If
Thank you.
I've got a minute to add to that,
Yes,
talking
please.
about this feeling, what you were just saying about seeing the actors physically expressing or going through that emotion, the voice cracking or the voice or the throat drying. There's this wonderful story about when Badulga created Spartacus. What he did was that he broke up the performance space in a way where the audience was sitting on benches and the actors were moving between them. And there was a sequence where the slaves came right up to the audience member and looked them straight in the eye from a distance, a short distance, and spoke to them about what they were going through. And there were audience members who said they had never experienced that before, that naked communication and honesty with an actor. And you could smell the sweat on the body, the strain of having performed, what the physical labor that they, had to go through. And there was, you were right there. You were right there and you were connecting in a way that left you very, very, so you talked about immersive, it left you very shaken because it didn't give you that easy space or distance to say that, okay, this is something I'm just watching, from a distance. So those kinds of experiences also, are very much part of the theater experience.
Of course, absolutely. And from what both of you are saying, we can say that theater does bring us together. It does celebrate the human experience. And of course, it teaches us empathy. And I think that's a beautiful point to end this conversation on. Thanks to the both of you for joining me today. It was deeply insightful. And thank you for your support and encouragement towards the 18th edition of Mahindra Excellence in Theatre Awards and Festival. And thanks to all of our viewers for tuning into this conversation of learnings at Meta. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. I was really feeling while we were doing this conversation that you were really engaging and being able to pick up on things, and it wasn't one of those pre-decided question number 3, question number 4, question number 5 experiences, at least for me, and I'm sure Quasar agrees. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, thank
Also,
you very much.
just to say thanks, because I've never had this kind of a conversation. I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with Anjum because we've never had an opportunity to sit and chat and, like, do this, and
Absolutely.
it's just been so exciting.
Yeah. Even
But
I
yeah,
was thrilled when I heard, because I've been following your work and admire what you do. And I know you do many different kinds of things, but we've never really been in the same space long
yeah,
enough to
unfortunately,
actually sit down and
sit
have a
down and chat.
conversation. So
Lovely.
thank
So
you to
Meta has
Meta.
brought you
Thank
two
you to
together finally.
Teamworks. Thank you to Eric.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks so
you
much,
so
Eric.
much. Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
Okay. Bye, Kwasar. Hope
Bye
to see
bye.
you soon.
Yes,
Somewhere,
hopefully.
somewhere in the theater world.
Somewhere, yeah.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye bye.